about it later. Okay, this looks coming. I know that not everybody will be on today, not feeling good. But otherwise, yes, here we are.
Yeah, turn the lights on. I would put them all on.
Okay.
No, that's not aimed at us.
I'll be right back.
So I think we are on time. I will not wait much longer. And I will now unmute, or no, mute all of you so that you can make all the noises you want. Remember that we have the chat room to write down things. And I see that Kim is sending a lovely message to everyone. So I'm not going to read it. You can read it, but I think it is wonderful. This should be a lot of pleasure, a lot of fun. Definitely unlike all the stuff you can get on television currently. So let's enjoy it very, very nicely. This, I can't believe it, that not only we are already on November 19, and not only that, but it is the fourth and last session of our Franciscan Soul program. This program, as you know, was about taking a look at the birth and the development of the Franciscan movement 800 years ago, as at that time an alternative and inclusive society, but of course also in the end, not just an intellectual historical interest, but to see if it still has some relevance, if it still can tell us something inspiring today. The first session that we had, I guess 8 weeks ago, we took a look at the background, the historical background of that central Italy in the early 1200s, Francis of Assisi, then will be Clare of Assisi, that can have some fame as Saint Francis and Saint Clare, but we focused on all the human reality. And after taking a look at that historical background, we spent an evening looking at the foundational experience that happened to Francesco, that not only changed his life, but even if he was not aware of it at the time, started a whole movement, because it didn't take long to have other people to join him. That experience, I qualified it with the Latin word of misericordia, which I would translate into English today as not just mercy, that I found, excuse me, but like a bland word, but more compassion, or even compassionate love, because it is an action. Francis, in his memory, said that it's doing doing misericordia. It's an action, not just a feeling. And that changed his life. And then because of the new kind of way of life he was developing, mainly with people who were outcast, people with leprosy, that was fear, as today the COVID-19, other people joined him. And at first they developed a group of just men. Many of them were former party partners of Francis, and they were happier than within the city of Assisi. But the second, after that, the second step after the Misericordia is the coming of the women. Claire, the first one, but immediately with others. And that brought in what I mentioned, what I called hospitium, that you can translate as hospitality. But I explained that the word hospitium, that is the place where they are hospitus, in Latin and in the Romanesque languages, there is only one word for host and guest, which means that hospitality is always a mutual relationship. And that is actually what Claire and the women brought into the beginning Franciscan movement. Claire and her companions, her sisters, some were from nobility, some were from just servanthood and peasantry, but they were all equally sisters. They were living in that place of San Damiano that existed before and was a place of hospitality just outside of Assisi. I may have mentioned to you, if I didn't, well, I mention it now, that the writings of Francis and Claire actually talk a lot of illness and healing. Sometimes to my students, I said, not feeling good, being sick, ill, was probably 6 days of the week. And when one day they didn't have something, that was a feast day. Because they talk a lot of that, and it's very interesting. I really like that. The word that comes into the context of illness, healing, caring, hospitality is the word patience. And I always like to say that in the context of illness, who has to be patient? Well, in the writings of Francis and Claire, the person with illness is a patient, and we still say it the same way today. But the person who takes care of the person with illness has to be patient as well, which is not necessarily easy. I mean, in the current pandemic, the people who care for others can become very frustrated, very tired, very burned out. And so it's interesting to see that the patience is something, again, that has to be shared on both sides of the care of the illness. And I talked about Claire as a healer and the healing place that San Damiano was. But I want to continue and link now with the third episode of our the birth and development of the Franciscan movement. We see a group of men, the brotherhood with Francis. We see a group of women, the sisterhood with Claire. And what about the laity? What about the people who are not joining a group of men or a group of women, but are just themselves with a family, married or widow, because that happens also. And here we are. And the first example, very, very nice example that we have is the story of a noble woman from Rome, whose name was Lady Jacopa dei Sette Soli. There is some legend around, and those who have been in the Franciscan circles have heard it, and all kind of strange things actually sometimes, that why did she have to be called Brother Jacopa when she's a woman? Those are interesting. How can a woman get into a man's world, right? But the story is very long. I want to focus on that Jacopa. She is from the same generation. She's a Roman lady, a little younger than Francis, a little older than Claire. She's actually very wealthy. And, but at the time that she gets to know Francis in Rome, she's already a widow with 2 sons. Women in those days would be married very early, and then would be widowed very early as well. Her husband actually was killed in a fight. What is interesting with Jacopa, and I think it's interesting in our program, is that she took control of her life, of her household, which was not very common at the time. She directed the household. She made the decision. She was the head of the estate, the land and the money that was in the family, and developed a very independent life in the use of her resources. She even got involved, not only socially in Rome, but even politically, believe it or not. That was not very common at the time. She got involved in conflicts, political conflicts, between the powers that be in Rome, and also with the papacy. And an interesting thing is that she managed to end an old fight between the papacy and her family. She negotiated an end of the conflict. So this is a very interesting character, more actually interesting than the early Franciscan documents, and unfortunately present. Fortunately, because she was a noble woman in Rome and was really important and active in her time, we have other documents. How did Francis get in touch with her? Well, yes, that is not really clearly known, but it's clear that at some point during a trip of Francis to Rome, the two of them met and developed a relationship, a friendship. Actually, we have some documents where Francis says that he only has 2 women in his life. And then he doesn't name them. And no, I should say the writer of the document doesn't name them. But from the context, the 2 women are Claire and Jacopa. And Jacopa really got what I like to call the Franciscan virus, and started working and living in the same direction. And for instance, she purchased an hospitium in outside of Rome, in Trastevere, which is still known today just as the Church of San Francesco a Ripa, for those of you who have been in Rome. And that was an hospitium. That means, again, a place of hospitality. There were people with illnesses there, including people with leprosy. And it's still, since then, a Franciscan place. She, after the death of Francis, she continued to be part of the movement. She put a large donation in the building of the Basilica in Assisi, where there is the tomb of Francis, and she was the one and only woman buried in that basilica. She still is. She died like in 1239. And her remains are still in the basilica, but not where she was buried first. For some reason, but I'm not going to spend time there, she was first buried near the altar, really in the center of the church. But in 1933, her remains were removed from that central place and put near the tomb of Francis. Not very visible. Many people don't even know that they are passing by it, but that's where the remains are currently. But the focus for me today is about the story of Jacopa being there when Francis dies. And we have several testimonies, Franciscan documents, but we really have to critique them and read a lot between the lines and using the context of the time. Because in the Franciscan religious text, they try to adulterate her presence, almost like a miracle that she had anticipated, that Francis wanted her to be there, etc. What is clear is this: Francis wanted to have Jacopa there when he was dying. Oh. And interestingly enough, Jacopa in Rome had some intuition that Francis was actually wanting her to come and be there while he was dying. And so she came. She was there even before anybody could come to Rome to ask her to come. She was there with all her household, sons and everything. And it's very clear that on the one hand, the companions, the male, the brothers, were a little uncomfortable. They didn't know how to handle it. But Francis was very comfortable and said, no, that's fine, that's okay. And everybody is here and should stay here. And staying here for Jacopa meant that she would be there to tend to the needs of the dying Francis. No question about, well, isn't there like a limit, that women shouldn't be closer to where the men's are living. And also, that's a little uncomfortable because Francis wanted to die naked on the ground, close to Mother Earth. Well, actually, Jacopa, like women in the Middle Ages, it was part of being a woman in the Middle Age, to be a nurse, to be there doing everything that is needed for what we would call today hospice care, palliative care, making the person as comfortable as possible to do the passage from this life to the other. And so we can read between the lines. If Jacoba was there all the way, she was there bathing Francis, praying with Francis, singing with Francis, mourning with the brothers. And it's very clear because the document said that she had brought a pillow, a blanket, candles, incense. I mean, everything that is needed for the environment. Plus one thing. She was famous for making some kind of cookie in late September, early October, when they have the grapes and they press the grapes to make wine. And there are also almonds and there is honey. And there she was making what they still call in Italy mostaccioli, little cookies with flour, almonds, honey, and that juice from the grapes. And she had that. She had that with her. And she stayed until the end. And so here we are, the link between Claire in San Damiano, who has a place that is an hospitium, a hospice, a shelter, a hospitality place. And then here we have a woman, a lay woman, that actually doesn't even need the place to actually operate as a hospice, a caregiver. Where she comes where the person is. And that brings clearly the laity in the whole picture of what we call now the Franciscan movement. Yes, I know there are Franciscan orders, there are institutions, and I will not go into that because our focus is actually what inspires people independently, even without or within legal, canonical, institutional group, what brings people together with the same inspiration. In 1220, around that, Francis was coming back from a time in the Middle Ages, in the Middle East, where he had been dealing with the big fight, the Crusades, the war between so-called Christians and Muslims. He wanted actually to bring peace there. He did not succeed, and it has been one of the sorrows in the last years of his life. But when he came back to Italy, he saw that things were moving, evolving, and that there were some institutional steps being taken. He realized that he could not stop that evolution, but he wanted to make sure that the original, the pristine experience would not be lost. And he wrote not a regulation, not a rule, he wrote a letter that was supposed to maintain and clearly what they were all about. No matter what kind of regulations, evolutions could legally or canonically be brought in. What was essential. And he wrote a letter that starts with, in Latin, the word universis, which I would translate to everyone. That's quite inclusive, I would say, to everyone. The letter has always been transmitted as a fundamental writing of Francis, but with a title that doesn't do, I don't think, justice to the text itself, when it's being titled Letter to the Faithful. And the word actually faithful is not in the text. Faithful is already a separation. They are the faithful and the unfaithful. And Francis was just coming back from the Middle East, where the Muslims were, for the Christians, the unfaithful, the infidels. So he writes a document here where he wants to include all human beings living in the whole world. Those are his words. And he just explains what it's all about. Yes, it has a Christian background, foundation, inspiration, sure. But really inspiration. So he started saying that, first of all, that plan of life is supposed, and he wishes, that it will bring peace and love. Peace and love. I know we're not in 1968 and flower power, but those are the words that Francis used in 1220. What are the elements of the inspiration of a life that would generate peace and love? Well, out of the Christian evangelion, which in Greek means good news, what we call today the gospel, two elements. That's all it takes, two elements. One, God wanted to become human, what the Christians call the incarnation, God becoming flesh in Jesus, which is for them very inspiring and not taking lightly, because they also are reacting to a society where everybody wants to climb the scale, the ladder of success. And the idea here, if God becomes human, that's the opposite movement, not ascending, but descending. And what does that mean? The second thing that for them is fundamental is what is called the passion of Jesus. And it can be seen as just the suffering, but actually, and the writings of Francis show, that's not, and Claire also, it's not just the suffering, it's first of all the love that is infinite and that will endure everything. That kind of love that offers, that gives everything, including its own life. So what comes out of that to inspire a new way of life is, first of all, that being human has a lot of beauty and excellence. Their writings of Francis said, look how, in what excellence we human beings have been put. beauty and excellence. Those are two major characteristics that they see. Being human is to be beautiful and be called to be excellent. I always wish that to my students. And the other thing is also that God showed in that movement humility and poverty, which they understood as not going after power and not holding on anything. Power and property. And what did they develop after that? And as we see it in the document written by Francis, well, they have to keep constantly connected to that inspiration. And they will do it through moment of meditations, times of contemplations, and also celebration together. Both, something in solitude, but also something in common. Celebrating the beauty of that life. What it means is that it cannot happen if we keep focused on ourselves. There is a need to turn to someone or something bigger than the ego. They called it God. I do think that even without calling God, there is still the need to say, I am not the center of the universe. We also probably know that when we think we are, we probably get in trouble. And if we look around us, we probably do not lack of examples of people who think that they are the center of the universe and they create chaos. With that, they can develop a life where they constantly turned to the other. That in the Christian tradition is called the neighbor. The neighbor is not a quality, it's not a status, it's an ongoing reality. Somebody is my neighbor if I get closer to that person. We can say, well, you know, administratively, your neighbor is the one that lives next door. The person next door becomes a neighbor if I get close to that person. That is the real meaning. And so that's what they try to develop, getting closer to each other. And the engine of that is that compassionate love, is care in action. We are concerned, they would say. What happens to the neighbor matters. So respecting the other, listening to the other. And then they realize that in living like that, they're building a new kind of association, and they call it Fraternitas, a group of brothers and sisters. And it's open. Yes, everybody can become a brother or a sister if a brotherly or sisterly relationship is being developed. It is as simple as that. Now, in reality, is it always simple and easy? Of course not. Of course not. It's going to be bumpy. But if we focus on the center, on the core, then we keep doing it. And so we can see that with a spiritual, and you could say religious, could say even theological, although there were no masters in theology, background, what they're really focusing on is the here and now. As human beings, who are we and what shall we do? How shall we live so that we will be in peace and love, and actually you can continue, and happiness? An old story of humankind. But I insist that the core of the Franciscan movement, the Franciscan way of life, is actually a social attitude that is countercultural. And in that letter that Francis wrote to everyone, eventually, after mentioning different situations, he will make it very clearly. We have to live simple, humble, and pure. And that's in opposition with the wisdom and the prudence of the world and the society. Simple, not simpleton, simple. There is no duplicity. What you see is what you get. Humility is to stay human. It's at the level of the humus. That's where we are. If we don't have our feet on the ground, we probably have our head in the clouds. And purity means that there is no no mixture, no blending. Actually, in his famous song, Francis, talking of water, call water pure. A water that you can see through, transparent. When you look at that, simplicity, humility, and purity are very close to each other. And to be more precise of the consequences of those virtues, we want, he said, we want to be of service. And we do not desire to be above anything else. That is definitely countercultural, and that is not easy to do. Especially when you get some qualification, some responsibility, it becomes more difficult to relate to the others, not as a superior, but also as a servant. The head serves the body. What? Doesn't it commanding the body? It all depends on the articulations, how you put the pieces together. But that is an ongoing process. And Francis, Claire, their companions, very quickly, group of men, group of women, people in married life, single, religious or not, got together with that plan, what they call the propositum. It's a plan. This is who we are. This is what we live, or at least we're trying to live. And as a movement, it's always something that happens locally. A small group of people getting together. There is a virus in action. There is some contagion there. And they get together around the same thing. And then that local group, there will be an echo a little further, and other people someplace else will hear about it and say, well, we could do the same thing. And that is exactly what has happened. And then it changed the reality of the places where those groups were active. All the reality, including the political reality. Because in that context, for instance, the documents show very clearly that they will not take arms. They will not participate in armed conflicts. They do not deny conflicts. And Francis is an example of that. But they will look for a resolution that is non-violent. It's quite fundamental. We have documents that says that some war did not happen because the people who wanted the war could not actually hire armies. Because it's always the same thing. Those who want the war need other people to make it. So that happened. What has always been fundamental, central in those groups, in places and in times, in history, is the focus on responding to the needs of others. That is the motion. That is what put them in movement, reaching out. I know someone who is in this group that has a saying that I've heard many times in the past 3 decades, and that I really love because I do think it's really true. And it was exactly the reason why Francis Clare and their companions started moving. When you see a problem, when you see a need, you are mandated by the Spirit to get acting, to get moving into a solution. So what we see then, it's very normal that they always got involved in 2 major issues. One is healthcare, and the other one is education. And throughout the centuries, you see Franciscan people until today involved in healthcare issues and education issues. But the whole thing is that there is a need for a better world. There is a need for a better way of life, not just for an individual or even a few individuals, for the whole. And when I look at the issues that they addressed 800 years ago, and they continue to address in different periods, I'm really struck with the fact that from the beginning, they were trying to develop alternatives to issue not only like individualism, materialism, but classism, sexism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and you could continue the list. I think that Clare and the early Franciscan women in the movement, and that was not even anticipated by Francis, I think, contributed to the promotion of women to be more than just the little helper or the pleasure provider, you can name it. So if that happened 800 years ago, and that if we go through the centuries and now and then, and we can see the impact, the influence of members of the Franciscan movement in history, it can, should, and is continuing today. You know, when the Europeans discovered or invaded America, you may use the term that you prefer, it's very interesting, but the man came first. Then the women came to heal the disaster. Many group, many congregation of Franciscan sisters came like that to heal the wounds. The Franciscan vision, for me, that's what put me in movement decades ago, more than 5 decades ago. It put me in movement because I realized how deeply rooted in the flesh, in human flesh it is. And it's not that everybody has to become Franciscan, but if we're rooted in flesh, we immediately connect and work with other people who connect with the human flesh the same way. So it's not that everybody has to be Franciscan, that everybody has to be Christian, but I think we all have to be truly human. And if that is what we want, and create a society of human beings who live together in peace and love, well, the Franciscan movement is still present and is still relevant. When I look at the picture today, well, a month ago, I was probably anxious and depressed. I am not anymore. Still concerned. There is a lot to do. There is a lot of work that is there to be done. And guess what? I think it's basically, again, about educating and healing and educating. We're not going to get all together happily without that. We constantly have to reconnect with each other. And it's not easy. And the pandemic actually doesn't make it easier. We have the technology and we use it tonight. And it's wonderful. But it also, I hope, reminds us that this is just something when we cannot do better, when we cannot connect in the flesh. Do you remember the last time you hugged somebody? Do you? Then you have a good memory because it's a long time ago. But we have to live and work so that tomorrow we can reconnect with each other more than just through the internet, more than just through Zoom, because that is essential. And the word fraternitas that I really love dearly, but it's a Latin word, I think we can translate it nowadays into networking and coalition making. Because other words, society, association, are too ambiguous. You know, we're not a mob. There is an ongoing, and it will always be, fight against individualism. But we have to realize that we have to work together. And then we may actually reap a wonderful fruit that we become friends, we become brothers and sisters, and that gives us more pleasure and happiness than anything that we can buy. Can we contribute as Franciscans or with similar inspiration to do what they were trying to do in the past, to build a world where there is a place for everyone, where there is work for everyone, where there is justice for everyone, where education and healthcare are just basic needs that are provided? Can we also not only not look at our own navel, but realize that we should take care of the planet Earth that is carrying her? And as Francis was singing, that is nourishing us. Killing Earth, I think we will not be alive much more. So all that. And then I am hopeful because I can see around me currently that there are desires about that, and that there are people, including us, involved to create something. And when, like where I live, Athena lives, Kim and Kelly live, we're trying to develop a village. Some people call it a virtual village, and I'm not too sure, because virtual may mean not real, a social, a relational village, not a geographical village. But that's, again, that's the same thing. We're trying to connect with each other, support each other, encourage each other, love each other, going through whatever life brings. That is what the early Franciscans were doing. That's what Franciscans tried to do throughout the ages. And again, I don't need the adjective Franciscan because it appeared after Francis and Clare. Francis was not a Franciscan. What matters is what we live and what we're trying to build with others. That is what matters and will develop something for the common good. And we are in our country currently at a time that these things are very much needed. We may get good leaders, but if we do not work as well, it will not happen. And I would really hate to have the birth and development of the Franciscan movement as a good historical memory. I got inspired, I am inspired, and I hope that inspiration keeps us working at something, and happy to do that. So here we are at the end of our 4 sessions, and some have asked me if the Franciscan Soul program would continue. It's a possibility. What we have done here, these 4 sessions, could be repeated with others, but also some requests could come on working on something else, going deeper into one topic. So it's very much open. And at this point, we have a little time there. If I could, I think, unmute everyone. Mute all. No, I don't want to mute. I want to do the other thing. Ask all to unmute. That's one thing. And then you can either raise your hand and say something or type something in the chat, and we could have a little exchange before we say goodbye to each other, at least for now. I still, in the chat, I still see only what Kim has written at the beginning, which is lovely. And I hope Kim and Kelly have enjoyed this time together in your pajamas. Okay, I don't see anything else. No remark, no comment, no nothing.
Jean-Francois, yes, I have a comment.
Go ahead, Mark.
First of all, I would just like to thank you for doing this. I have found it helpful in my own understanding and in my own journey as a Franciscan. And you've given me some resources to look at, which will further that journey. So I'm very grateful to you for that. And so I just like to thank you publicly for that. And I do hope, I'll come up with some idea, but I do hope that the Franciscan Soul does continue at some time.
It would be lovely. It would be lovely. And in a way, if we become like a little group open to newcomers. It can be more interactive. Some of us may also have something to share, some presentation.
I like the concept of the village. I do.
Yeah, there are several of us here besides Kim and Kelly. Kristen and Ed are part of it. We're
Yep.
part of it. It's sort of yes, it's very human. It's very Franciscan, really, from our perspective.
Here they are.
There they are in their pajamas.
I must say you look great.
Very comfortable.
Jean-Francois?
Yes,
I just a comment that as a practicing heathen, I found the first 3 sessions, which were historical, and secular is the wrong word, but looking at facts and dates, to be really right in my comfort zone. Tonight, your evident spirituality leaves me not so comfortable, but that's probably apt given our socio-political environment. And so in that end, toward that end, this was very useful, very helpful, and enjoyable for me.
thank you, Ed. Thank you. Yeah, I must admit that I was very much aware. It was like an exercise or a challenge for me to find ways, and which means also vocabulary, to be inclusive in what I was explaining, that was, in a context of Christianity without questioning at the time.
Mhm.
And it is true that with more time, there could be an interesting thing, a look at how did they, in the 12th century, where the Inquisition was already beginning, how did they manage to remain who they were, free, without being excluded by the institutional church? They were true acrobats, I think. Yes, Ed.
Well, isn't it true that so much of Francis's comments and even Claire, was so supportive of the institutional church? I mean, accepting, I should say, totally accepting of it. And so I don't know if that was a deliberate way to maintain it inside it, but in any case, that's evident that they did that,
Well, what happened is the document that we have from Francis and Claire is that they wanted to be part of, not just not to be kicked out, which would have probably be lethal,
Mhm.
but they always focused on the fact that the source of their inspiration had been carried through history by that institution.
Mhm.
And so they wanted to keep contact with that, and at the same time, very kindly reminding the institution that the only reason of their existence was to give that, to carry that.
Mhm.
And they didn't want, of course, then things in history changed, but it is obvious that they didn't want to be part of the administration of that institution. They just wanted to be still nourished so that they can be in the life that they wanted to. And I do think that I remember some years ago, I was asked, don't you think that Franciscans should be there in the church? And of course, it was the idea of being in the choir and telling people and everything. And I said, I responded, and I still maintain that response. I think the Franciscans have to be at the door and bring people in. Bring people in the inn, including. Yes, Kristen.
Well, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and tonight I was struck over and over by how many ways that the ethos that you described that define the meaning of your life are consistent with the values and principles of Unitarian Universalism. I feel like, I would never call myself a Franciscan, but in action, in belief, in what I feel is my purpose here on earth, I'm completely aligned with what you say.
That's wonderful. When Francis went to the Middle East, he was confronted with the war that was there, and he tried to bring peace between the two opponents, and that didn't work. And it didn't work predominantly because the Christians, at the head of the Christians, there was a cardinal who said, no, we need to eradicate them. Talking of Islamophobia. But Francis succeeded in then getting in touch with the Muslims and actually had a tremendous experience in his own life that really contributed to his own journey, that he realized that they were wonderful human beings. They were actually in tune, in sync with most things, the most important things. And from that time, it is clear that he had, not only he had been touched by his experience, the time that he spent with them, and particularly the head, the Sultan, but he kept a memory and was deeply disturbed with the fact that that Christianity was still continuing the crusade, the armed war against the Muslims. This is not to say the Muslims are perfect. The Muslims have no war intention. It's at a different level, at a much deeper level. Francis, unlike what was said around him in Christianity, realized that the Christians and the Muslims, as honest human beings, had a lot in common, enough to get along. And so he was really disturbed, really at some point disturbed, that was not happening. Yes, Judy.
Yeah, I've always had a question about whether or not Francis had any encounter with Jewish people. He went a long distance to meet Muslims, and here in his own country, there would have been Jews. And I know later on, the friars were pretty harsh in promoting anti-Judaism.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, is there anything about any encounter Francis would have had, or even his encounter with Muslims, how it might have carried over to the Jewish people as well?
in the documents, the early documents we have, there is absolutely no mention of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally agree with you. I have been looking, and some people said, well, you know, he may even have been Jewish himself because his father was in the cloth business, and that's one of the typical Jewish business in Western Europe. I wouldn't buy into that. And it's strange because from other medieval historical documents, we know that there are Jews all over Western Europe, and every time there is a problem, the Jews are the scapegoats. You know, if the plague starts, and you should, you know, this COVID-19, are you sure it's China? Isn't it the Jews?
It's real.
Well, in the Middle Ages, that's exactly how they would have reacted.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. What I do know, and that is not with the Franciscans, because you are right. Then, you know, Bernardino of Siena, that has become San Bernardino of Siena, my goodness, he was a preacher that couldn't have enough hard words for the Jews and for the women too, I must say. So, I mean, if it had depended on me, I don't think I would have canonized him. But what I like to say is that the conviviality is possible. In Spain, it is historically attested that you had Muslims, Jews, and Christians, Dominican friars, living in good harmony, communicating with each other. It's only later, we are in the 1600, I think, about that the Queen of Spain, Isabel, wanted to be more Catholic than the Pope and destroyed that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's very sad. That's very sad because in the essence, and I always like to say the word religion, religio in Latin means connecting. And I look at history, and it's one of the greatest dividers among human beings. But it shouldn't be that way.
I think maybe you have some inkling of maybe a new topic here to talk about, to pursue, you know?
Yeah, yes. Well, it's true. We talk, and I mean, even at St. Bonaventure, there is a commission on diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least it's recognizing that there is an issue. There is a need for something. Yeah, you may be right. I couldn't encourage you more to send me email to communicate with suggestion, with request, even if it's request for some reading. I'm always happy to share what I have received. You know, I am who I am with just a little addition to what I have received from others. And it continues like that. That's how I look at myself as a teacher. You continue a tradition, you add a little something. It's true that I didn't see everything 20, 30, 40 years ago as I see it today. And that's probably another reason to share what I see today, because one day I will be someplace else. We all will.
That's right.
Okay. Anybody would like to give the final blessing?
Bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all
Thank you
too.
very much.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Stay
Now,
well,
Namaste. Yeah.
stay well.
stay well, be safe.
Okay.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving. Yes,
Yes.
wonderful. Until next time,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you.